Welcome, and thanks for joining us today for our presentation, Overcoming the Impossible. My name is Stephen Pollack. I'm the founder of InsideSpin, and I am presenting the first of a four-part seminar series that will explore different ways to look at overcoming some of the challenges of making a technology business successful. This first presentation, Overcoming the Impossible, it's designed to give you some fresh insight into why technology businesses fail to meet their objectives and hopefully provide a couple of examples that you can use in your organization to help make a breakthrough and achieve some new goals. If I can, I'd like to do a quick introduction of myself. I am a serial entrepreneur. I've had many jobs in my career, all the way through to when I was a young teenager, with opportunities such as delivering the newspaper, working at McDonald's, car wash, etc. And as I look back at my career, even these jobs were very illustrative to help me figure out different ways of being successful. I had to be creative, I had to be innovative, I had to follow through, focus, communication, all the skills that are needed in order to do jobs well. And I think as I look back at all of these types of jobs, I realized what a foundation they had provided for my success later in my career. I've also been the CEO of a very successful technology company called Platespin, founded in 2003 and sold to Novell in 2008. We rose very fast from a group of 11 people to over 225, with revenues exceeding 40 million. And we were recognized as one of Canada's top technology successes in the first decade of the millennium. I've also described myself as a versatile executive. Through my career, I've had a number of working opportunities to lead different roles in the technology company, such as marketing and sales, development, support, services, basically other than finance. I've had at some level a senior role and been part of companies who have been very successful on a global scale, which has really created a lot of interesting experiences and perspectives to share with others. I'm also a product specialist. That's my sort of core capability, to understand how to create very insightful product strategies and look for different ways to bring them to market and bring all that together from the point of view of excellence and execution. I'm also an author. I started InsideSpin a little over 10 years ago. If you've had a chance to take a look at it, it contains many articles that can help leaders and entrepreneurs face the challenges they have in making businesses successful. These were obviously drawn on my career, and hopefully it can provide useful things. Now, one of the reasons to even go through this at all is to remind people that you really never stop learning through your career. You never stop moving forward. And as long as you sort of keep that in mind, you'll continue to discover new ways to achieve the goals that you have. For those who have had a chance to look at the outline for my presentation, you'll note that I am drawing on some materials from The Alchemist, a very famous book written by Paolo Coelho. What I found for me when I read this book is it provided that sort of spark to give me a new way to look at some of the challenges that I faced throughout my life, both reflecting backwards as well as looking ahead forwards. And I've since used material from this book for a variety of presentations, and we're going to use it today to help illustrate how you can overcome the impossible. So I extracted this quote here from the book. In order to arrive, you must follow the signs. The world is inscribed with the path that each man must follow. It's just a matter of reading the inscription written for you to find success. So if you step back a bit, basically this is saying, if you go through the creation of a business in a very thoughtful way, if you understand what you're trying to do, your feasibility of getting it done, what your customer needs, how to reach them, and if you have a really good handle on all of that, then you'll start to reveal the path you should take to get towards that success. And I've come to truly believe that this is a very important perspective you can have for executing your business plans. And in my presentation today, I'm going to draw 5 points out of The Alchemist to help support the perspective that it is possible to make most any business successful as long as you know how to look for these signs. So why do dreams go unrealized more times than not? That's really at the heart of the idea of overcoming the impossible. And really the main reason is that if we think back to how we're raised, our parents and all the people around us, they share their experiences mostly through a negative perspective. We're conditioned to believe that everything we want to do is impossible. It's hard to cross the street. You shouldn't touch the stove. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. Don't talk to strangers, on and on and on. And even though it is a bit of a dangerous world and you do have to know those things, but they are conveyed to us in a negative perspective. And as we grow, we tend to build that perspective into our pursuit of dreams. So if you have read The Alchemist, you'll recognize these particular 4 points. Starting with childhood, we're conditioned to believe everything's impossible. We know what we want to do, but we don't want to hurt those around us because we'll often have to abandon those relationships in order to pursue the dream, which basically means working hard. We fear the defeats we'll meet along the path of success. So that's an interesting one with a lot of, which would actually be the basis of a presentation as part of this series. We don't like to be defeated. We don't like to have failures. So if we're not careful, we may actually stop trying to do the hard things because we just can't overcome them. And then lastly, we fear realizing the dream for which we fought and how it might affect us and those around us. And this really talks to the idea of what it means to be successful. And when you achieve that point of success, are you actually at the finish line, or are you back at the start line to go at it again? And I've learned through my career that you basically are back at the start line and you go through it again. So therefore, it's a very fearful experience to potentially realize the goal that you're setting out. So we'll talk about that through the 4 presentations that InsideSpin is putting on. The first one will start with looking at the negativity that's created based on the way we're raised as the principle for which this will happen. So the agenda for today will cover 5 points. How we can turn around negative conditioning in our business organization, how we can learn to treat a business plan as a source of leadership rather than just sort of a document we create for other people to read, how we can reduce time spent on paths that lead nowhere. This is a really important element of the way I like to think about operating businesses, and we'll talk to what we call the so what principle. Knowing who you are as a business. If you don't have the right understanding of it, then you're often setting goals and objectives in a wrong way, in which case you're basically wasting your time. And lastly, how do we change over from wishing to be successful to actually planning to be successful? And I tend to spend a lot of time when I work with organizations on that last point, because often success is a wish and it's not actually part of your plan. And if you were to look at it from the point of view of being part of your plan, you'd realize how many gaps still exist in what you've thought through. And therefore, your chances of being successful are dramatically reduced. Recognizing negative conditioning. So starting with childhood, as we see in The Alchemist, we're conditioned to believe that everything we want to do is impossible. So if we look at our lives, we're basically taught to grow up in a negative constraint, which builds sort of layers and layers and layers of fear and prejudice and guilt in our daily decision making. We're just not comfortable making positive choices. This can lead to a decline of accepting tougher challenges. And of course, business is full of tougher challenges, given we're predisposed to think that they are unsolvable. So over time, we sort of as a business descend to the same level as everybody else. And that's not really what you want. You're trying to be better than the competitors. But if everybody operates this way, you all kind of sink down to a common method of pursuing your business goals, which tends not to be one that meets the market the way you'd want. So this human experience factor, which I've looked at both from a parent and a professional perspective, where we often convey through a don't or can't do filter, we create a prejudice that hinders our path to success. This is really important, and it may be subtle, but if you create an opportunity in your organization to sort of practice turning around negative conditioning to positive, the first step typically is just to point it out and recognize when you're in a meeting that the way most people are contributing to the meeting is through can't do types of participation. So negative conditioning, if we look at it in more detail, what we first want to try and recognize is how do we deal with new ideas? Because they're often responded to with why they won't work. If you think of the last time you might have met with the development group and you're talking about a new feature, you're often getting as your first reply all the architectural challenges that are out there in terms of implementing that feature. So there's sort of a hesitance right away to take that on, where really you're trying to explore just defining what the obstacles are. So although you need to know what those obstacles are, they're presented in a can't do attitude rather than a can do attitude. So our confidence or lack thereof hinders this desire to push through the problem, and instead we try and work our way around the problem to avoid it altogether. And that's not really what you want. Problems in a business need to be knocked down and overcome. You don't want to be thrown onto a different path just because there's a problem in the way. We don't understand our current situation, which is often a key one, so we make assumptions based on some other premise. We think we're running one type of race, but we're actually running a different type of race. So all the decisions we make about when to stop and have water are different. You're in a marathon versus a sprint. You need to really understand which of the two types of races you're in so that you make the right choices in the right context. Otherwise, you're going to only be able to look back and realize you made mistakes, and that's not what you want. You want to be able to look ahead and look for those beacons that are out there to say, if I were to do this, I bet you this will get me to my goal. Not, boy, that really seems hard, so let's just kind of avoid that problem and look at some other way to get to the finish line. So the tree view, which is probably where this is most well understood, the tree versus the forest view, is kind of the easiest way to understand how this problem sort of develops within an organization. So we need to develop that habit of stepping back and away and be unemotional, which is the words you can see underneath my picture, in order to sort of manage this concept. The tree view is typically where I find people just get so caught up in the daily activities that they can't step back and sort of unemotionally realize that the purpose of this meeting is just to discover potential new paths and kind of intellectually explore them. Whereas when you're standing right in front of the tree, all you see is a big obstacle, and all you really want to do is go around it because cutting it down is really challenging. It didn't bring my axe, didn't bring my chainsaw. Whereas if you develop that culture where, for the moment it's a forest view, let's have a forest-oriented meeting, then people's constraints are removed and you might find there's much more productive solutions to get around the business problems of the day. So consider that perhaps where you might schedule, typically they're best done at the end of a week, a forest meeting rather than a trees meeting, and encourage everybody to be free-floating in their desire to work through problems. You want to adjust the perspective, look at alternatives, and innovate forward rather than avoiding the path just because the obstacle is there. Topic number 2 has to do with business planning, and this is where you might already be groaning. Business plan, oh my God, a big document, I don't like doing them. Do I write them all down? It's 100 pages. I've got to come up with diagrams and charts and financial projections and so on. While all of those things are true, one of the things that you can find if you do go through the effort, it's like building a maze for your business. If you build enough detail in the maze, then your staff can go walk the maze and actually successfully get to the end. And the way they do that is the maze is designed to reduce the chances that they're going to go down a bad path. And the only way that can happen is if you have enough detail in the maze and you have enough ways to define the what if criteria that people can use to recognize the beacons that they're supposed to follow rather than the ones that they're currently on. So if you keep your ears and eyes closed for those beacons, then you're just going to walk through the maze bumping into everything and get stuck in the end paths, and you don't want that. So what we're trying to encourage here is to look at a business plan as an enabler for navigating that path to success, sort of walking that maze. It's designed, if you do it right, to make decisions for you. So it provides leadership. Things that make decisions are often viewed as a concept of leadership. So a business plan can provide leadership to your organization, and people will decide to do things because they are in the business plan rather than waiting for a person to actually tell them what to do. It captures what we should do when the unexpected happens. So your business plan shouldn't be one-dimensional around the path. It should have the what ifs sort of in the plan. What if we're off revenue? What if we're ahead of revenue? What if we're on revenue even? What if we can't find some staff? What if we can find more A candidates than we originally wanted? Can we grow faster? All those sorts of things. What if a competitor gets to market ahead of us on something? What are we going to do in that particular case? The more you answer those questions, the more people can all around you walk your path to success without having to be there sort of micromanaging everything. And that's a lot of what a business plan will do, is it reduces layers of micromanagement that are required. It'll reveal what will happen next if your assumptions are met, those beacons. If we get to the following sort of measurable metric event, we've identified a beacon, therefore we know we're on our path to success, we continue going. If we don't come across that beacon, we have to stop because the plan says that we have to make some changes and start pivoting. So basically, it helps us manage what you might call the difference engine that separates pressing on the gas from pressing on the brakes. And from a business point of view, really risk management is largely what the senior team has to worry about. And the better you can manage it, the more risk you can take with confidence. And if you think about it from the point of view of confidence, that's what this whole challenge is. How do we overcome the impossible? If we don't have confidence, then risk will beat us down. If we do have confidence and we do have thought and we do have a forest view of a lot of our problems and we have our beacons identified, then you can more safely manage the risk points of the plan that you're following. Most businesses don't really have leadership business plans that are written in this way. You write them often at the beginning of a business and you don't often update them as you go. You really have to think about how to create a living document concept to reflect this sort of pathfinding that you're being encouraged to go through as part of this presentation. So the business plan says this, the business plan says that, so that's what we do. And what's also interesting is it takes some of the office politics out of the decision-making process. So people who are in that leadership position aren't really having to argue with followers to go get something done, because the business plan will have already told them or provided a context by which that decision is being made, so they don't have to explain it. And that's very, very important. Metrics to measure by. That's a pretty good way to organize your business plan. Identify ways to recognize you're on a path to goal achievement. So I'm sure you've heard the concept of quantitative versus qualitative. As much as you can, you should have quantitative ways of measuring the success of your business as your primary beacons for being on the path to achievement. If you don't identify those measures, then you really don't have any way of really understanding that where you are on your path. Are you at the 5-mile marker, the 10-mile marker in a race? The beacons need to be defined in order for them to be recognized. So you reduce risk, you identify reward, but also you can trigger pivots and changes where needed through the proper definition of these types of plans. It's also a reminder of the path, and that's really important as well. Captures vision, captures milestone, purposes for doing A, then B, then C. If you think about the most successful organizations, everybody who works there typically knows what the vision is for that organization. They almost don't have to be told. They just are. When I worked at McDonald's, that was how it was ingrained in me. I know that's maybe an unusual comparative, but they were very good at teaching us what the vision was for the business. And when we came in, we all just know it. We didn't actually have to have anybody tell us about the quality objectives they had, the packaging objectives, etc., which was very good for customer service in those early days. Responsibilities and accountabilities. Those are also very important because, again, really in the end, when problems do occur, you do want it to be easy to identify who's responsible for the resolution. If the business plan is well defined, then the resolutions tend to have paths that a group can discuss with a forest view in mind. So it enables more leadership, clarifies ambiguities, and it encourages people to take responsibility. What I found in an organization is you want to encourage people to do their jobs. You want to encourage them to take the responsibility of the tasks they've been given. And the more you do that, the more content they are to keep their head down and keep doing work rather than always looking over their shoulder, worried that they're making mistakes, because they don't have a context by which they can decide if they are making a mistake or if they are achieving something important for the organization. So when we look at our plan, if it has the milestones in it, if it has the quantitative measures, then that does help somebody to understand that they're doing their job well, which is obviously what you want. Measure, measure, measure. We never stop measuring at PlateSpin. We were always looking for different ways to measure our success, and then create more and more ways to track those measures, because they all had impact on something to do with moving our business forward. Great leaders enable decision making within their organization, and if a great leader concept includes understanding the value of a business plan, then you're even a more great leader than you might otherwise be. Even though you might be able to walk around and make all the decisions all the time, that can't be the way you build a scaling organization. You can't be dependent on that one person that way in order to be successful. So as we transition beyond the value of a business plan, let's look at how we avoid paths that lead nowhere. So this is largely a topic related to how to avoid wasting time. There are many examples in an organization where people are given tasks, but really in the end, it's not really related to the end goal of the business. If they complete that task and they learn something from that task and they finish it, it doesn't actually get absorbed as a point of change with the business. You're not making decisions based on the outcome. Obviously, there are cases where that happens, but in general, the whole idea is to develop a culture where let's not go and do that if in the end it doesn't actually further our goal. So the way I've tried to give a perspective on this has to do around competitive analysis. It's probably the easiest one to sort of single out as a path that leads nowhere. Um, and this chart, what it really shows is that the world has changed from, let's say, 30, 40 years ago to today, where everybody has access to the same information globally. Used to be when you were building your business, the local environment, the local city you were in, or province, or country, or state, whatever, was its own unique microcosm of customers. And if you were competing in that area and somebody was competing in another country, you each had your own access to private information, including technology. Nowadays, that's not true. Everybody understands everything all at the same time because of the way the internet's structured. So there's sort of no secrets around need. If you want to service customers, you can get input from customers all around the world as easily as you can for people down the street. So it's kind of removed some of the original set of competitive drivers that are out there. So when I want to look at this topic, I tend to focus on the idea of the phrase, so what? And what I'm encouraging companies to do is when you're in a setting where you're trying to make decisions about getting certain tasks done, like you're creating task assignments for the next sprint in development or whatever, you want to ask, so what? Why am I doing this? What am I going to get as the outcome from this? Don't spend time on it if it has no impact on our success. Don't look for beacons that don't matter if you find them. I'm running a race, I'm running the marathon, and I might find the sign for the 10K race that's running right beside me. It doesn't actually matter that I found that because I'm on my race, going in my direction, trying to find my finish line. So you don't look for beacons that really don't matter if you happen to find them. You have to do it based on confidence in your own plan. If your own plan is well designed and thoughtful, then there's a lot of things you really don't need to do. So the most common time wasting example that I find in most organizations is competitive analysis. And when you build out an organization, you often decide for yourself that you need to have somebody responsible for competitive analysis. And their job is to go ahead and investigate a bunch of companies, find out what they're doing, do product reviews, find out about their pricing, who their customers are, maybe even what kind of people they have on their team, how they package things, what their website looks like, on and on and on and on and on. And when it's all said and done and presented, nothing changes in your organization. You just go ahead and you keep doing what you're doing. So really, in the end, it didn't matter that you found out that information. You might be intellectually curious. You might feel better if you found out that they weren't as good as you. You might feel maybe not so good if you think they're better than you, but the likelihood is if you've got a good handle on what you're trying to do as an organization and you've got a great business plan driving it, that none of that's really going to matter. So just don't do it. So the takeaway here is that if you're confident in what you're doing, always ask, what if? Stand in a meeting and say, okay, that's really great, but let's say we find that out. Are we going to pivot in some way because of that? And if the answer is, yeah, probably not, well, then let's just put it on a shelf until some later point in time and just not worry about it right now. So you don't really need to know all that stuff about your competitors. Are you really going to change something based on what you learn? If you are going to, that probably means you have problems in the way your organization is formulating its plan because you have access to the same information that competitor did. You should know that those things are needed just like they do. So you're not listening, you're not connected, whatever it might be, or your vision's not correct. So those are corrections to make. But the fact that your competitor is doing it shouldn't matter because you have the same information that they do, and you should be able to come to similar conclusions about what's required. So if you're not going to pivot, and you're not going to copy them, then why bother doing it? So a practice that we had a lot of was this so what concept. Why am I doing this? Build your decision tree to see where you're getting to, what your beacons are going to be. If it's nowhere interesting, then just stop. If it is somewhere interesting, but stop when you get there. Don't keep going because you've found enough to recognize that some change in your plan is required. You don't have to know exhaustingly every little thing about everything to do with competition. So it's a bit controversial to maybe think this way, but it was the best example that I could bring to the table here for this presentation that helps people understand how do I go about avoiding paths that go nowhere. And again, when you're looking at the tree view, it's very, very easy to lose track of the fact that that tree is actually not in my forest. So there's no point in me actually learning about it. I'm not going to need to cut it down. I'm not going to need to incorporate it in any way. All that time is doing is just taking away from other things that I can do. The next topic is knowing who we are. Now, some of this comes from, this is sort of old, this chart here, Crossing the Chasm. So Geoffrey Moore, pretty well-known author in the business community who kind of created some interesting models by which you can think about leadership and business cycles. But a lot of the heart of this was encouraging a really good understanding of the stage your market is in, your buyer, and matching it up with the decisions you make about how to do what you're doing. So just to pick this, it's a pretty simple chart. I'm not sure if you've seen it or not, but if you haven't, an innovative buyer is very different than a late majority buyer in the way Crossing the Chasm has been written. And if you don't understand that, and you come across somebody who's a late majority buyer and you don't qualify them that way, then what you're offering won't match what they're trying to buy, and you're just going to waste your time. Similarly, an early innovator isn't necessarily looking for the level of completeness that a late majority buyer might have. So you can get away with finding innovative buyers in the early stages with a different packaging of your product, a different way of operating your business than in the late majority. Now, again, today with global reach, sometimes you have all of these all at the same time. And of course, that's very difficult to service. So it's important to understand that if I have 10 customers, I have to qualify them even more than I ever did around what type of buyer they are and what stage their purchase cycle is in and how mature they are in terms of adopting technology to know how to position what I do. If you're an innovator, and this is largely where Geoffrey was focusing his materials, he's trying to talk to you about how to cross that chasm to get into the more mainstream sizes of your market. But what he's teaching is decisions. He's teaching pivoting. He's teaching a way to think about certain business problems, and they become very important and truisms in a lot of successes that have been looked at over the last 30, 40 years. So part of how we do this is to set goals that are not unrealistic goals, but match the stage of market we believe we're going after. Missing a goal is often more harmful than not trying to reach a goal. If you think about that, if my goal is to come to market in January and I'm not really ready to match what I'm offering with the people I'm going to offer it to, then what ends up happening is you disappoint them. And now all they know you by is being a disappointing supplier. And that's really hard to overcome. So you're better off not having delivered anything than to have delivered something that doesn't meet their goal. So you have to set goals that are very realistic and match what the person is who's trying to buy it. Your business plan is very important, and one of the things that I find is very important is you have to start these things really early in a business cycle. Don't start them, after I get to 30 people, after I get to 50 people, after I have 10 million in revenue. It's very hard to put some of these processes in place at a later stage in your organization. It's much, much easier to start them really early, do them in skinny down fashions if you have to, but let those processes build as the organization builds rather than trying to fit them in later. So a business plan is a good example. You should have them there from day one, and you should always have it with the same level of detail, and that will really do well for you as you go further on in the life cycle of your business. Defining where your focus should be. Base it on the stage of product, the market opportunity, the customer maturity. Team maturity is also very important. The right fit goes a long way to achieving the desired goals. And if you're looking for more materials on this, and you haven't yet picked up a copy of a book like Crossing the Chasm, it's filled with pages of interesting insight around these types of points. Review what you're doing, communicate who we are, shift and pivot, even just to practice, because that market cycle changes really fast nowadays. And if you're not prepared as an organization to change what you're doing, to go from beacon to beacon as you find them, then you're missing an opportunity to be competitively advanced versus other people in the market segment. So sometimes it's useful to even just practice changing, just to make it something the group is more comfortable with. And you'll find, at least I have found, human nature accepts change when it's made relative to a defined point, a stake in the ground. It's very difficult to accept change when it's presented in an arbitrary way. Tomorrow we're going to do that. Okay, that sounds interesting, but I don't know why we're doing today's work, so I don't know why we're doing that work. So my human nature is to look at it now negatively. I'm not really fully on board with that. You can order me to do it, I suppose, versus, okay, we originally said we were going to do this. Here's what we've learned. So now we have to pivot that way. It's much more understandable method for justifying a change, and therefore you'll get the buy-in of the people in your organization more vigorously than you might otherwise. So knowing who we are allows all that to happen. And those stakes in the ground become very important for you to implement change management so that you can pivot. And one thing that's very clear, and certainly should be in the last 6 to 8 months with something like COVID coming across us, is the need to pivot has never been more strong than it has been in this type of situation. Now, it's a bit of an extreme situation, but a lot of businesses have successfully pivoted, and they could only do that if their business was used to changing. If it's not used to changing, to accommodate knowing who we are and moving through those cycles you see in the Jeffrey Moore scenario for crossing the chasm, then it's very, very challenging for you.
Our last item about how to overcome the impossible is to make sure you're actually planning to be successful. What I find as I've worked with a number of companies is very often they're wishing to be successful, but not actually planning to be successful. So when success does sort of lurk out there right in front of them, they're surprisingly not ready for it, and they actually don't achieve it. Somebody beats them to it, or they sort of ruin the opportunity they've created. They got to take a few steps backwards before they can step forward again. So planning to be successful is actually takes a lot harder work and more diligence around some of the other points we've talked about, including your business plan, in order to make sure that when success does come your way as an opportunity, you can grab it and you can move through it and realize all the gains that it will provide you. So first off, and in no particular order, make sure your plans have answers to the questions that are related to growth. Play the what if game with your staff and your team. What if we were to double our customers? What if we were to be asked to deliver this feature? What if we were to pivot this way and find that it's really interesting for everybody and we start to get more sales interest? What if our website were to receive a whole bunch more hits? If you don't have good answers to those questions and you don't have a path that takes you through them, then if those things happen to you, you're not ready. You're reacting to the moment, and often you're just not going to be prepared and you won't make the right decisions, and those customers will just move on to somebody else who's a little bit more ready for it. So planning to be successful is very important. Don't wait to implement systems and processes. That's another one. I find a lot of smaller companies think that they can put off some of the more sophisticated things they see in bigger companies, like implementing a sales tracking system, forecast tracking system, proper accounting, monthly business summaries, doing budget month over month analysis and against targets. People think sometimes those are only for bigger companies. What I found though is they're a lot harder to do as you grow if you haven't yet done them. So I always encourage the people I work with to put in these business processes and systems right at the start, even when they're just 2 or 3 people, and then evolve them as your business grows, which is a lot easier to do than to try and put them in at some later point in time. So you don't want the cause of your lack of success to be your inability to put in systems that deal with growth. Third point, don't underservice or undercommunicate with your clients. Just because you've sold somebody a product or a service and they've acquired it and they've used it, don't forget about them. Stay in touch with them in some way, shape, or form. You've created a relationship. They like you as a supplier, and you don't actually know what that's going to do for you if you don't communicate with them. Maybe they're interested in another. Maybe they have a referral. Maybe they want to know what you're doing next. They want to just talk with people who create that community around your product that makes them feel good about having bought it. So don't underservice them, don't undercommunicate with them, and you'll find that'll set you apart with your clients, which will help you achieve more success than you may already have. The fourth point has to do with this internal tax concept, which basically means you make too many shortcut decisions in the early stages in order to deliver what you're trying to do. And then when success happens and your product has to be more robust and it has to start supporting larger numbers of customers, it's just not ready for that. And you have to take a whole bunch of steps backwards to correct all the shortcuts you took at the beginning. So although there are shortcuts required, they can be done in different ways. You could understand how to scale a database without having to necessarily implement all the pieces. But when you need to go scale it, it's better that you've figured it out already and you can add the elements that are needed rather than to go back and say a whole redesign is required. So you have to keep that in mind as you go. So again, if you're planning for success right from the beginning, then every time you make a decision, you should make it in the context of being successful, and that will hopefully guide you towards different types of trade-offs that are going to prepare you better for the opportunity you're pursuing. And the last point, which is a bit a challenging one, so you have to sort of consider it a little bit, which says to hire every A candidate resource that comes along. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you go hire 200 people if you only need 4. But if you have the right definition of an A candidate and you really push it up the category of strength of candidate, then you'll find not that many actually come along. But if they do come along, you want to do what you can to hire them. They will singularly influence the success of your company by bringing strong leadership, strong experience into your equation, and that'll overcompensate for the cost that an A candidate may have in terms of the benefit to you. So whether it's the top developer you can get, the top marketing person you can get, etc., don't start arguing over a little bit of salary percentage just to get a better quality candidate, because every organization needs quality candidates. It actually doesn't need a lot of them to be very successful. You typically need 3, 4, 5 really strong candidates throughout an organization. They become the leaders. The leaders create followers amongst the rest of your team, and your business does better for it. So with those 5 points in mind, under the banner of planning to be successful, consider whether or not your business is actually operating this way. And if not, go back to your team and start asking the questions that say, are we really ready for the success that we thought we were going to pursue? Even though it might be 1 or 2 years out, let's get ready now for it. And therefore, when it does happen, we'll be able to achieve it.